What if you keep doing it wrong? Even though you hate it, even though every time it happens, something inside you tightens, your chest feels heavy, and you promised yourself, this was the last time, but then it happens again. And the worst part isn't even the mistake anymore. It's the voice in your head telling you that maybe this is just who you are now, that you're stuck like this, that no matter how much you pray, how much you try, you're always going to fall back into the same place. And now you're tired, not just of the habit, but of yourself. Tired of asking God for forgiveness for the same thing. Tired of feeling like you're disappointing Him again. So what if the real problem isn't just what you're doing, but what you've started to believe about yourself because of it? You've said it before, maybe not out loud, maybe just in your thoughts, but you've said it with conviction. This is the last time. And in that moment, you meant it. You felt the weight of it, the sincerity of it. You were tired of the pattern, tired of the same thoughts, the same reactions, the same habits pulling you back into something you already decided you didn't want anymore. But somehow, here you are again. And the hardest part isn't just what you did. It's that you knew better. You saw it coming. You even felt the warning inside your mind, and still, you walked into it. That's what makes it feel heavier. That's what makes it confusing. Because part of you genuinely wants God, wants truth, wants peace, and another part of you seems to move in the opposite direction, almost automatically, like it's not even asking for permission. It feels like your mind is divided, like there are two voices inside you pulling in different directions. One is quiet but steady, reminding you of who you want to be. The other is louder in the moment, persuasive, urgent, convincing you that just this once won't matter. And after it's over, that voice disappears, leaving you alone with regret. And then comes the conversation in your mind, the questions you don't always say out loud. Why do I keep doing this? If I really had faith, wouldn't I be different by now? Why do I pray and still feel stuck? And slowly, something more dangerous begins to grow, not just frustration, but fear. The kind of fear that whispers, what if this is just who you are? You start wondering if change is actually possible for you. If maybe you've crossed some invisible line, if maybe God is tired of hearing the same prayer over and over again. Because you've asked, you've tried, you've promised, and yet the cycle continues. So now it's not just about the behavior anymore, it's about what it means, about what it says about your faith, your heart, your relationship with God. And somewhere deep inside, there's this quiet tension you can't ignore. Because even in the middle of the struggle, you still care, you still feel it, you still want something different. And that creates a question that doesn't go away if you truly want to change. Why does it feel like you can't? What if the very thing you've been interpreting as failure is actually the beginning of something deeper? Because the truth is, the fact that you feel this tension awareness, the discomfort, the resistance inside you, that is not something to ignore. That is not something to be ashamed of. That is something to understand. You see, one of the most common misunderstandings in your spiritual journey is this. You think that if your faith were real, the struggle would disappear. That once you truly believe, once you truly surrender, everything inside you would align instantly. No more internal conflict, no more opposing desires, just clarity, peace, and consistency. But that expectation is not reality, and it's not how God works. The presence of a struggle does not mean the absence of faith. In fact, in many cases, it's the opposite. Before, there were things you did without even thinking, patterns you followed without questioning, reactions that felt normal, automatic, even justified. But now you notice. Now something inside you resists. Now there's a pause, even if it's brief, a moment where you recognize this isn't right. That awareness changes everything, because you can't fight what you don't see. And for the first time, you're seeing it. Not perfectly, not consistently, but clearly enough to feel the tension. And that tension is uncomfortable. It makes you feel divided. It makes you question yourself. But what if that division is actually evidence that something new is happening inside you? That something is shifting, even if it doesn't feel like progress yet? There's a quiet truth here that often gets overlooked. Before transformation becomes visible, it becomes conscious. You begin to see what was always there. And when you see it, it feels worse not because it is worse, but because now he aware of it. It's like turning on a light in a room you've lived in for years. The mess didn't suddenly appear, it was already there. But now, you can't ignore it. And this is where many people misunderstand their journey. They assume that because they still struggle, nothing is changing. That because the behavior repeats, there's no growth. But growth doesn't always look like immediate victory. Sometimes it looks like increased awareness. Sometimes it looks like feeling the conflict more intensely than before. And that can be discouraging if you don't understand what it means, because you might start asking, why do I feel this more now than I did before? Why does it bother me so much if I'm still doing it anyway? And underneath those questions is a deeper one. Is something wrong with me? But what if the discomfort you feel is not a sign that something is wrong, but a sign that something is waking up, that your mind is no longer passive, that your heart is no longer numb, that your spirit is no longer silent? This doesn't mean the struggle is over. It doesn't mean you won't fall again, but it does mean you're no longer the same person who walked into it unconsciously. And that matters more than you realize, because real change doesn't start with perfection. It starts with awareness. And if that's true, then the question shifts. Maybe it's not, why do I keep failing? Maybe it's something deeper, something more important. What exactly is happening inside you that you haven't fully understood yet? You've been trying to fight what you do. But what if the real battle is happening long before that moment ever arrives? Because by the time you act, something has already been building inside you. A thought, a pattern, a quiet agreement in your mind that you didn't even realize you made. And this is where the struggle becomes more complex than it seems. You look at your actions and think, that's the problem. But actions are often just the final step of something that started much earlier. Something subtle, something repeated, something that felt small enough to ignore at the time. Your mind is not passive. It's constantly forming pathways, reinforcing patterns, shaping the way you respond to situations even when you're not paying attention. And over time, what you repeatedly think begins to feel natural, familiar, almost automatic. That's why sometimes it feels like you're moving without choosing, like you're watching yourself repeat something you already decided against. And that creates even more frustration, because now it doesn't just feel like a mistake, it feels like a lack of control. But here's the part that often goes unseen. Your mind has been trained, not intentionally, not consciously, but consistently. Every repeated thought, every mental agreement, every moment you entertain something without challenging it, it all contributed to a pattern. And patterns don't disappear just because you want them to. This is where another misunderstanding quietly shapes your expectations. You think that once you decide to change, your mind should immediately follow. That once you know what's right, your thoughts will automatically align with that truth. But knowing something and thinking in alignment with it are not the same thing. You can know what's right and still have thoughts that pull you in the opposite direction. You can believe truth and still feel influenced by something else. And that internal contradiction can be exhausting, because now you're not just dealing with actions, you're dealing with thoughts that don't seem to listen to what you believe. So the question becomes, why does your mind keep going there? Why do the same thoughts return, even after you've rejected them? And more importantly, what do you do about it? Because ignoring them hasn't worked. Trying to suppress them hasn't worked either. If anything, it sometimes makes them stronger. And this is when a deeper truth begins to emerge. Transformation doesn't start with controlling behavior, it starts with renewing the way you think. Not once, not occasionally, but consistently, slowly, intentionally. Because your thoughts are not random. They are influenced by what you feed them, what you focus on, what you repeat internally. And over time, those thoughts begin to shape your responses without you even realizing it. So when you find yourself falling into the same pattern, it's not just about a lack of discipline in that moment, it's about something deeper that has been forming over time. And that realization can feel overwhelming at first, because it means the solution is not quick. It's not instant. It's not just about trying harder next time. It's about something more internal, more consistent, more patient. But it also reveals something important. If your mind can be shaped unintentionally, it can also be renewed intentionally. And that opens a new question, one that shifts your focus from frustration to possibility. If your thoughts have been forming patterns without you noticing, what would happen if you started paying attention to them? There's a part of this struggle that feels deeply personal, almost isolating us. If you're the only one experiencing this kind of internal contradiction, you look at your desires, your intentions, your prayers, and then you look at your actions, and they don't seem to match. And somewhere in that gap, a quiet conclusion begins to form. Something must be wrong with me. But what if the tension you feel is not a sign of something being broken, but a sign of two different realities existing within you at the same time? Because one of the most important truths you can understand in your spiritual journey is this: there is a difference between who you are becoming and what still exists within you. And those two don't always move at the same pace. You have a desire for God, for truth, for something better that's real. That's not fake, and it's not insignificant. But at the same time, there are patterns, tendencies, and internal responses that were formed long before that desire became clear to you. And those don't disappear overnight. This creates a tension that can feel confusing, because you expect that once your heart changes, everything else should immediately follow. That once you decide to pursue God, your old reactions should lose their power instantly. But transformation doesn't usually happen that way. It's not an instant replacement, it's a process of renewal. And in that process, there's overlap. The old and the new exist together for a time. Not because you're failing, but because you're being reshaped. This is where many people become discouraged. They assume that the presence of old patterns means nothing has changed. That if the struggle is still there, then their faith isn't healthy enough, or their effort isn't strong enough. But the presence of conflict can actually mean the opposite. It can mean that something new is resisting what used to go unquestioned. Think about it before. There was no internal argument, no hesitation, no awareness. But now, there's friction. Now, there's a part of you that doesn't agree with what you're doing. And even though that friction feels uncomfortable, it's significant because it means you're no longer fully aligned with what you used to accept. Still, this raises a difficult question. If something new is growing inside you, why does the old still feel so strong? Why do those familiar reactions seem to take over in certain moments, almost as if nothing has changed at all? And this is where expectation quietly shapes your experience. You've been measuring transformation by how quickly things disappear, by how fast the struggle fades. But what if transformation is not about immediate elimination, but about gradual weakening? What if the old patterns don't vanish instantly, but lose strength over time as something else becomes stronger? Because strength is built through repetition. Just like your old patterns were reinforced over time, new patterns require the same process: consistency, patience, intention, and that can feel slow. Sometimes frustratingly slow, especially when you're hoping for a clear, immediate shift. But slowness does not mean absence. It doesn't mean nothing is happening. It often means something deeper is being built in a way that will last. And here's where the tension becomes meaningful instead of discouraging. You're not stuck between two versions of yourself. You're in the middle of a transition. The struggle you feel is not evidence that you're going backwards. It's evidence that something inside you is no longer willing to stay the same. And that changes the way you see the battle, because now it's not just about trying to eliminate what's wrong. It's about understanding what's being formed in you through the process. And that leads to a deeper question, one that shifts your focus again. If this struggle is part of a process, what role is it actually playing in your transformation? There's something subtle that happens after you fall into the same pattern again. It's not just the action itself, it's what follows. The internal reaction, the weight that settles in your chest, the thoughts that begin to spiral. I did it again, I knew better. I should be past this by now. And without realizing it, you start turning against yourself. Not just correcting, but condemning. And it feels justified. Because in your mind, if you feel bad enough, maybe you'll finally change. If the guilt is strong enough, maybe it'll push you further away from repeating it. So you sit in it, you replay it, you let it define the moment. But here's the question that rarely gets asked. Has that guilt actually changed you? Or has it only made you feel worse? Because there's a difference between recognizing something is wrong and carrying the weight of it in a way that keeps you stuck. And many people confuse the two. You've been taught directly or indirectly, that feeling bad is part of becoming better. That the more disappointed you are in yourself, the more serious you are about change. But over Chimi, that belief begins to create distance, not closeness. You start avoiding God instead of moving toward Him. Not because you don't care, but because you feel unworthy to come near. Your prayers become quieter, less confident, sometimes even absent. Not because you've stopped believing, but because something inside you says, "What's the point? You're just gonna fail again." And this is where the cycle becomes deeper than behavior. It becomes relational. Because now, it's not just about what you're doing, it's about how you see yourself in relation to God. You begin to approach Him, not with honesty, but with hesitation. Not with trust, but with shame. And the more distanced you feel, the harder it becomes to experience the very thing that actually leads to change. Because real transformation doesn't grow in an environment of self-rejection. It grows in an environment of grace. And grace is often misunderstood. It's not ignoring what's wrong. It's not pretending the struggle doesn't matter. It's not lowering the standard. Grace is the space where truth and patience meet, where you can see clearly without being crushed by what you see. But here's the tension. If grace is so powerful, why does it feel so difficult to accept? Why do you find it easier to sit in guilt than to receive something that actually restores you? Part of it is because guilt feels like control. It gives you the illusion that you're doing something about the problem, that by punishing yourself emotionally, you're taking responsibility. But in reality, it often keeps you focused on yourself instead of allowing you to move forward. Grace, on the other hand, requires trust. It asks you to believe that God's patience is real even when you don't feel like you deserve it. It invites you to come close, not after you've fixed everything, but right in the middle of your struggle. And that can feel uncomfortable, almost undeserved. But that's exactly where change begins. Not when you've proven yourself, but when you allow yourself to be restored. Because when you come from a place of grace, something shifts internally. You're no longer trying to change out of fear. You're responding to something deeper, something steady, something that doesn't disappear every time you fall. And that creates a different kind of motivation, one that isn't driven by pressure, but by connection. Still, this raises another question. If grace is available, why does the cycle continue? Why doesn't understanding this immediately break the pattern? And maybe the answer lies in something you haven't fully considered yet. Maybe it's not just about what you feel, but about what you choose, moment by moment, when the opportunity to respond differently appears. There's a moment that keeps repeating itself in your life. It doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet, subtle, almost unnoticeable if you're not paying attention. It's the moment right before the takes over, right before the thought turns into action, right before you say, do, or return to something you already decided to leave behind. And in that moment, something important happens. There is a choice, not always loud, not always easy, but real. And this is where everything begins to shift, because transformation is not built in the big promises you make when you feel strong. It's built in the small decisions you make when you feel weak. This is one of the hardest truths to accept, because part of you is still waiting for a breakthrough moment. Something powerful, something undeniable, a sudden clarity where everything becomes easy and the struggle disappears. But most of the time, that's not how change happens. It happens quietly, through repetition, through small acts of obedience that don't feel significant in the moment. And because they feel small, you underestimate them. You think, this one decision doesn't matter that much. I'll deal with it next time. It's not that serious. But those moments are not isolated. They are connected. They are shaping something. Every time you respond, you are reinforcing a direction, either strengthening an old pattern or beginning to build a new one. And at first, choosing differently feels unnatural. It feels forced, almost like you're going against yourself. Because, in a way, you are. You're going against what has been repeated and reinforced for so long. And that resistance can be uncomfortable. It can feel like tension in your own mind. A pause that didn't exist before. A hesitation that makes everything feel slower, heavier. And sometimes, in that moment, it feels easier to just give in, to go back to what's familiar. Not because you want it, but because it's easier than fighting it. But here's what you may not realize yet. Every time you choose differently, even in the smallest way, something shifts. Not always in your feelings, not always in your immediate results, but internally, something is being rewired. A new pathway is being formed. And it doesn't require perfection, it requires consistency. This is where many people get discouraged. They think if they can't do it perfectly, there's no point in trying at all. So one failure becomes an excuse to stop trying. One mistake becomes a reason to go back fully. But transformation doesn't work that way. It's not all or nothing. It's built in layers, and even partial progress matters. Even one different response matters. Even one moment of awareness where you pause instead of reacting automatically that matters more than you think. Because you're no longer moving unconsciously. You're engaging the process. And over Chimi, those small moments begin to accumulate. They begin to change how you think, how you respond, how you see the situation. What once felt automatic starts to feel optional. What once felt impossible starts to feel within reach. But this takes patience. And patience is difficult when you're tired of the cycle, when you want to be free now. Not gradually, when you're exhausted from repeating the same struggle. And yet, this is where trust becomes essential. Trust that what you're doing, even when it feels small, is not meaningless. That God is not only present in your big breakthroughs, but in your quiet daily decisions, in the moments no one sees, in the choices that don't feel impressive, but are deeply significant. Because spiritual growth is not measured only by what you overcome instantly. It's measured by what you consistently surrender. And surrender is not a one-time act. It's a daily posture, a repeated decision to align your thoughts, your responses, your direction even when it's difficult. And slowly, something begins to change. Not all at once, not perfectly, but steadily. And that leads to a realization that reshapes everything. Maybe the goal was never instant perfection. Maybe it was faithful progression. And if that's true, then the question becomes clearer. What if the small choices you're making today are already leading you somewhere different? Even if you don't fully see it yet, at some point in this journey, something begins to settle inside you. Not because everything suddenly becomes easy, not because the struggle completely disappears, but because your understanding changes, and that changes how you experience everything else. You start to see something you couldn't fully grasp before. You are not stuck, you are in process. And that realization doesn't come from a single moment. It comes from everything you've been walking through. The awareness, the tension, the small choices, the moments where you felt like nothing was happening, but something was. Because now, when you look at your struggle, it doesn't define you the way it used to. It doesn't carry the same weight of finality. It no longer whispers, "This is who you are." Instead, you begin to recognize it for what it actually is, a part of a transformation that is still unfolding. And that shift is powerful, because identity changes everything. When you believe that your repeated failures were a reflection of who you are, you felt trapped. But when you begin to understand that your identity is not your struggle, you start to see the struggle differently. It's no longer a prison, it's a place of growth. That doesn't mean it's comfortable. It doesn't mean you won't still face moments where the old patterns feel strong. But now, those moments don't carry the same confusion. You're no longer asking, "Why am I like this?" You're asking, "What is happening here, and how do I respond differently this time?" There's clarity where there used to be frustration. There's patience where there used to be pressure. And maybe most importantly, there's space. Space to grow without constantly condemning yourself. Space to approach God without feeling like you have to hide, because you've started to understand something deeper about Him too. God was never waiting for you to fix yourself before coming closer. He was never measuring your worth based on how quickly you changed. He has been present in the process the entire time, in your awareness, in your resistance, in your desire to be different, even when your actions didn't fully match yet. And that changes how you relate to Him. You're no longer coming from a place of fear trying to earn back something you think you lost. You're coming from a place of trust, learning to walk through the process with Him, not away from Him. And as that trust grows, something else begins to grow with it. Consistency. Not perfect consistency, but real, steady, movement. You begin to notice that the pauses are getting longer, that the awareness is coming sooner, that sometimes you choose differently. And even when you don't, you recover faster. You don't stay stuck in guilt as long. You don't spiral the way you used to. You return. You realign. You keep going. And that's what transformation actually looks like. Not a straight line, not instant perfection, but a gradual shift in direction. A steady movement toward something better, something truer, something aligned with who you're becoming. So when the question comes backhanded, well, why do I keep repeating what I know is wrong? You no longer answer it with fear. You answer it with understanding. You recognize that there are still patterns being undone, still thoughts being renewed, still choices being learned. But you also recognize that you are not the same as before. And that matters more than you realized at the beginning. So instead of feeling